Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind, and today I'm going to introduce you all to Dr. Kyle Elliott, who's the founder, tech career coach, interview coach behind caffeinatedkyle.com. As a result of working with Dr. Elliott, senior managers and executives have landed jobs at these big name companies that you've all heard about. It's Amazon, that's Meta, that's Google, and nearly everything else that you can imagine in the world. So thanks for coming on the show, Dr. Elliott. Kyle.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and speaking with you and Jack and the audience.
So, just for the benefit of everyone who might not have worked with a tech career coach, a professional coach, an interview coach, can you walk us through your career?
Yes, so I will kind of walk backwards from where I am now. I'm a tech career coach. I primarily work with senior managers and executives who fall in two buckets. One is I know what I want to do. I want a job at Amazon or Netflix or some hypergrowth startup. Help me get that job. And then the other group is I don't know what I want to do. Help me figure that out. So I help them figure it out and then get in that bucket. But how I started here is different than a lot of tech career coaches. I didn't work in tech at a company or two and then launch a coaching business. I didn't work in HR or recruiting. I actually started on the platform Fiverr. For those of you who are unfamiliar, you can literally pay $5 to someone to do a service for you. They can record your voicemail or create a logo. My service was reviewing resumes, was writing the about section on a LinkedIn profile, and that blew up. And fast forward 12 years later, and that business kept growing, and now I coach people full time.
Well, Kyle, what in terms of your coaching in tech, how is it now? Because you hear about all these layoffs and downsizings and changes. Maybe you could level set, like what do you see in the marketplace?
A lot of people ask me that, and my first thought is it's a difficult market. And I'm like, actually, I don't think it's necessarily difficult. I think it's just different. Your old job search methods of I'm just going to apply to a bunch of jobs, it's not necessarily going to work at some of these companies. I do have clients who just go in blind, no pun intended, that just go and apply to a bunch of roles and they'll get interviews, especially at top companies. But what you have to do now is be a lot more targeted because there's so much AI and automation out there that'll just apply for you. Companies are getting literally thousands of applications for a single job. And that recruiter or hiring manager, it's difficult to sift through. So you have to be more targeted. And when my clients are networking and reaching out to people, they're getting success. That's just one step. You also have to be qualified and match those roles you're looking for. So if you're really targeted with your approach, you're actually reaching out to people, then it's just a different job market. You just have to put more effort in for each application you submit than in previous years, maybe even 2 or 3 years ago, where you just applied. And if you were qualified, you got called in.
Kyle, can you elaborate on this? Because you mentioned about, they have these new tech kind of things where you could apply really easily, and then it just floods the market so that if there's an opening on LinkedIn, you could get hundreds and hundreds of people who apply
Yep.
in. So can you, for people who are frustrated, like what the heck is going on here? Can you maybe talk about like what type of programs these people are using to just automatically send out their
Yeah.
resumes?
Yeah, some of it's LinkedIn Easy Apply, so they're just clicking through
Mhm.
there and applying. Other ones, there's like AI software. I don't have a specific one I
Mhm.
recommend because I don't recommend it. But there's like AI software you can buy or use that will apply for any job that fits a certain parameter. Or some people will hire a VA, a virtual assistant, to just apply to a bunch of roles. So there's tons of people
Mhm.
applying for these roles, and oftentimes it's people who aren't always qualified or the best matched. So that recruiter's having to sift through so many. And if someone who knows you can, hey, reach out to that recruiter or hiring manager, not just through the ATS, the applicant tracking system, but kind of a side door. And let's say I know Jack and Jack knows Rick and I want to work at Blind. I'm like, hey, Jack, can you email Rick real
Mhm.
quick and have him look at my resume? You're going to have a way higher response than if I just applied cold on the Blind website, for example. And that's really what we mean. And what I mean when I say networking is just those personal connections as well. And you don't have to know Jack one on one. It could even be, hey, I listened to your podcast. I love this episode of Kyle. And then I see, Rick and Blind has an opening, and just spending that time. And it doesn't have to be super time consuming. I encourage people, maybe set a timer for 10 minutes for each application you submit. Spend 10 minutes trying to leverage your network or building up your network of contacts at that company.
So how do you do that? Because you hear the phrase networking, right? And most people, it's like, ick, networking, going to like an event and you have like a label on your suit and you know, shaking hands, you're all sweaty. What's the best way to network? Because you have to probably cultivate and build it first, right? Maybe you could explain that
Yes.
to people, how you kind of do that so that you can feel comfortable reaching out to folks.
I hate networking in the traditional sense. I'm a huge introvert. It makes me sweat. I'm not a fan of it. So I love technology because then it makes it easier for fellow introverts to then be watching Netflix at the end of the day and then just being on your phone, and you can send a LinkedIn message. Or you can say, hey, Rick, I wanted to write for the Blind blog. So I reached out to a co-founder I met at Blind at a conference, and then they introduced me to Rick. So it's leveraging those connections and saying, how can I reach out to this person in a way where they're going to want to stop and read their email when they get hundreds of emails, if not thousands of emails every week? So it could be someone you met at a conference, if you did go to a conference. I love using alumni. So going through your college or even your high school or a certificate program you went through and saying, who do I know? You can also use Blind. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on this podcast, but a lot of my clients go to Blind and say, let me go see who else works at these target companies, and say, hey, you posted on this platform about working at this company. Can we chat real quick? And what's key is most people aren't going to do that. Everyone hears this advice, but most people don't. So when my clients do reach out to people, they're like, oh my gosh, I actually got a response from this VP at Meta, this director at Amazon, because a lot of people don't actually take anyone up on that offer to network.
I really appreciate that breakdown because I think, I mean, as Jack was alluding to, networking can seem very intimidating, especially if you're maybe earlier in your career, or maybe you've only worked at one or two companies and you just think, well, my network is my company or my team, and I can't let them know that I'm going to switch jobs, right? Maybe I'm stuck, but really it's these little things, and they really are very simple and quick to do, and they don't need to be too scary, actually.
Yeah, I find sometimes people exactly think that, Rick. It's everyone at my company, but I've had clients, I say, what phone books do you already have? Or not a phone book, but what list do you have? And they say, oh, the PTA. Let me just go through the PTA contact list and start seeing where everyone works. Oh, I'm a member of a synagogue and we have a directory. Let me go through and see where everyone at my synagogue works or who they might know. My favorite is your phone. Get your phone and go to your contact list and see where people work. You can do the same with your LinkedIn contacts, your Instagram followers, or people who you follow, Facebook. And if you just start repeating that, you realize, oh my goodness, all these people, then all their friends, and you already have this network, even if you've only been at one company for a long time.
Now, you've mentioned why someone kind of might want to work with you or might want to start networking in terms of, gosh, thinking about making that change, whether it's their job function, whether it's their company, or even entire industries. That can seem a bit scary, especially if you're moving industries or companies, going from maybe a smaller one to a larger one. Can you give us some advice there? What are you seeing among your clients, these kind of folks that might be considering a switch?
Oftentimes when people want to switch, they say, I want to go work for Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, these big tech companies, and they're coming from finance or somewhere. That's going to be a tough nut to crack to trying to get into these big companies. So I'd first kind of look at your own experience and say, are there overlaps between what I'm doing now and tech? Maybe I work in digital payments at my company. So maybe if I target a tech company, maybe a PayPal or a Stripe or something might make sense, instead of just the ones with the biggest name recognition. So you can use Blind, again, not just because I'm on the podcast, but go on Blind and look up the culture at these different tech companies, or ask people, what payment platforms do you recommend? So that can be powerful. And then I would go find, this is my biggest piece of advice, go find a job description at one of these companies and then rewrite your resume from scratch using that job posting. Because a lot of times, let's say you come from banking, they're going to be like, we have 12 million customers. Well, at a place like Stripe, they're called users. They're not customers often, or they're going to be using different language. So you want to mirror your language off of that job description. So then they say, oh, it sounds like you've been doing digital payments for a long time and you'd be great for Stripe or PayPal or Square, instead of talking like how people talk at Wells Fargo or Bank of America or JP Morgan Chase. Even though you're doing similar stuff, it's really translation. You have to translate your experience for that industry and really speak their language.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because if you come across using lingo or buzzwords or jargon that don't mesh up, it's just going to kind of knock you out, I bet. Because they can say, hey, this person doesn't know anything about our industry. They're using all the wrong terminology. And then let me ask you this too. So it sounds like, okay, if you want to go to Apple or Amazon, what have you, but it seems like you're saying maybe in part go a level under. You didn't say this, but I'm kind of
Yeah,
inferring maybe start that and maybe have a better chance to get your foot in the
because less
door.
people are going to apply. Those ones
Okay.
that are still great companies, but have maybe less name recognition or people don't think of. So maybe they have 200 applicants instead of 1,000. I would suggest thinking of it like your kind of investment portfolio, and can you diversify it? Maybe a third of them are these really huge companies that everyone's applied to. A third are maybe these still large ones, but not every single person is applying to. And then a third is maybe hyper growth startups or SMBs. So like your investment portfolio, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, but you're targeting different ones. And if you're data driven, you can even see, okay, I applied to 10 really large companies, 10 mid-size, 10 startup. What's my response rate? And then you can even do that ABC testing and seeing where you get the best response rate and then double down in that area. If you get a 90% response rate to SMBs and none to the big tech, okay, maybe that's where people see that you have the most transferable skills.
Does it make a big difference, because you're hearing a lot of layoffs and downsizing, hiring freezes, to do your homework and see what's happening? Because otherwise, I imagine you get frustrated, that you're sending your resume, you don't hear back. How do you navigate that?
I think you could. I think it's helpful to have some context of the market. However, when I coach with people, I say, who's on this screen here? It's you and me. What's in our control? And it's helpful to be aware of the job market and make sure there's jobs out there you can apply to. But we can't really do anything, at least in the immediate term, you and I, about layoffs, about the number of jobs available. So I say, what's in our control? What can we augment? What can we optimize? Let's focus on that. And people say, oh, but the layoffs and this, we can't do anything about that. What's in our control? And I think that's the focus of coaching. And people who are most successful in their job search, they say, this is in my control. Let me keep optimizing this and focusing on that. And it's good to vent. You can have your kind of venting, set a timer for 5 or 10 minutes and vent and talk to some friends and be annoyed, and then say, okay, let me go back and focus on what's in my control.
I mean, in terms of other things that we can control beyond kind of making sure you're networking, looking for those side doors, being kind of pragmatic and realistic about what's going on in the industry, in the job market, what are other things that we can kind of easily control in terms of our professional life, especially when we're out there trying to get another one?
I think, as Jack said, this kind of level below, or I call it a lily pad. Like if you want to go work in tech and you came from finance, is there this middle ground between maybe fintech or something that's not like pure tech, where it makes sense for you to target? And trying to make that huge jump, I think of it as a Venn diagram. You want there to be a good amount of overlap between your current industry and current role and the new industry and new role. If you're going for your first time management role, for example, maybe leading 1 or 2 people or being a tech lead. Or if you're going for a tech company, making sure it's not the largest tech companies in the world. Yes, you can aim for those, but you're probably not going to be successful. So being realistic and targeting maybe something that's in between your dream job and where you are now, and being realistic and knowing that you maybe even need 2 lily pads before you go from a finance company to a Meta or an Amazon or a Google.
So in a way, you got to pace yourself and not feel frustrated if you if you're going to, top, FANG company and it doesn't hit right away, don't take it
Mhm.
personally. You might have to take some steps in between.
Yeah, I would use LinkedIn or Blind or different places to even see two people who are in your target role. And I think of it like market research. How did they get there? Did they
Mhm.
come directly from a company like yours, or did they have some lily pads? What did their background look like? Clients will often ask me, can I land this job? Well, let's go see. Did other people in your role and from your company land this job? Let's go find 20, 30 people in your target role and see what their background looks like, their education looks like, what their LinkedIn looks like. And that can give you insights as to how you stack up to the competition.
On that note, is there value in terms of looking for these booming industries like AI, where there seems to be just so many startups, so much venture capital funding going into
Mhm.
these companies? Some of them are obviously quite hot, quite famous, and might have that competition that you're warning us about. But is there something to kind of going after these booming or new emerging industries?
I think it could work for you. I think having that be part of your pie could be smart, but not letting it be the whole pie. And if you've never worked with AI or it's only been a portion of your role, maybe not go for a role where 100% of it is using AI. Maybe a role where AI is part of it or it's AI enabled. So, really being mindful and being realistic about your job search and saying, hey, if they're interviewing multiple people and I've only used AI a little bit, and someone else has used it 100%, am I going to be the right fit here? And being realistic, and as Jack said, pacing yourself as you go through that job search.
Well, I'm curious from a little bit of a different angle. For people who aren't familiar with tech interviews, how different is it when you do a tech interview as opposed to like a non-tech? Do you have to know how to code? Can you walk people through, especially for people who want to move over? Because they may feel like, oh gosh, I don't know how to code, so I'm going to get knocked out. Can you give some color on how that plays out?
Yes, such a good question. It's going to depend on the role. If your
Mhm.
role is going to involve coding, then you might be expected to code. If you're going for a higher level role, you might have to do a systems interview. Um, if you're going to be presenting a lot in the role or collaborating with cross-functional teams, you might have a presentation interview. So it's going to depend on that role. What I love about a lot of these tech companies is that recruiter, they're getting evaluated on the number of people who convert to offers oftentimes. So they're really going to help you. They're going to give you a lot of resources. Often they'll do interview prep with you. So you can ask them for insights and say, hey, how do I best prep for this interview? So it's going to vary a lot on the role, but they tend to be a little tougher, people find. There's more rounds of interviews. It could be 4 or 6 rounds, or sometimes 8 rounds of interviews because you're meeting with different people, that recruiter, the hiring manager, the panel, a case study or a presentation, the coding, if it's a technical role. So it just tends to be more exhaustive and people aren't as used to that, and kind of keeping that stamina up through all these rounds and this kind of 30 or 45 days of multiple interviews.
So yeah, that's interesting. So on average, how many rounds do you go through? Let's say kind of just say a mid-level person.
Yeah,
Do
it varies. Usually I'm saying
yeah,
like 3 or 4 interviews,
okay.
maybe five, from like the recruiter all the way through the hiring manager and final offer.
And part of the interview, are you expected to sit down and write code like right in front of the interviewer? Like how does like for people who don't like myself who are not aware of it, like how is it? Like, are they going to say,
Yeah,
okay, you write some code for this or do some, whatever for this?
yeah. If you're targeting a technical role, you might be coding in front of
Mhm.
them, or they might have a coding challenge that you do more offline in like an environment that's recorded or something. So it'll depend on the company and the culture. A lot of clients like using an interview too to tell them what kind of culture is this? Is this a more high stakes culture where you're going to have to code in front of people that's really pressured? Is it more of one where you're going to have more time to think and reflect? And with these interviews, it's important too. A lot of the interview isn't just do you get the answer right, but how do you communicate? Do you ask the right questions? So a lot of people, especially as they rise through the ranks, they get nervous about that. They think I have to come up with the right answer. But I've had clients who answer completely wrong and get offers because they really just want to see how do you communicate? How do you collaborate? How do you work in a stressful environment? That's what a lot of the interview is really about.
I mean, Jack, what are you seeing on your side in the kind of the quote unquote non-tech world? How are interview lengths going? And what do the case studies or processes stages look like?
I don't know if you want to know the answer, because this is
Oh
not,
no.
all right, it's,
Give it to us
I,
straight, Jack.
I don't like being the bearer of bad news, but for white collar professionals lately, I'll give a technical term. It sucks. It's it's
Mm,
it's really freaking horrible. Seriously, it's really tough. If you look at like the monthly jobs reports when it comes to white collar workers, terrible, terrible. Like almost no
mm,
hiring at all. It's part-time jobs, it's contract jobs, it's government
mhm,
jobs, it's healthcare jobs for all, the illegal,
mhm,
illegal immigrants are coming in for healthcare. So for actually white collar, it's really hard to find a job. And it's
mhm,
so frustrating because you go send out resumes, you see on LinkedIn where they give a counter. Now it caps it out like 100, and I think they stop giving, anymore because it freaks the people out. Like, oh my God, how am I going to
mhm.
get a job? So it's really brutally on the self-esteem and confidence of people because if they're sending out resumes, they don't hear back. They go
Yeah,
for interviews. They go for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 interviews, and then they get ghosted.
yeah.
And it's really rough. It's really tough. Now I'm generalizing. Is it for does everyone go through that? No. But as a whole, the non-tech world,
Yeah.
it's very hard. I mean, have you seen that too? I know you specialize in tech, Kyle, but like, do you see
I've
that
seen
also?
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is a shift in hiring, especially during the summer. That happens as well. It tends to be
Mm,
extended. A lot of people on
yeah.
vacations, and then it's like, oh, in 2 more weeks, you'll have your next interview. And then they're like, oh, another week because this person's out of the office. So it just tends to be extended, which can bring up a lot of anxiety and stress for people, which can be really difficult.
See, that's a good point you raised because the summer holidays, it's very hard to get traction.
Hmm.
So for people who are watching this now, not only for the summertime, but any kind of holiday period, it
Yeah.
gets really hard because people are out of the office, they're not paying attention, they're not focused.
Hmm.
So it's not that they're not interested, it's just they're not around.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And it's important to kind of, again, focus on what's in your control and continue to follow up, continue to apply for jobs. Everything in your control is important.
I mean, when you see such a prolonged process and you're meeting with so many people, I mean, gosh, it must be the difficult for the other way around where the hiring manager, they're meeting so many people as well. Can you give us some advice in terms of how we can stand out as a candidate? Are there any
Mhm.
maybe especially impactful questions or thoughtful questions or kind of things that we can kind of take on in terms of how we present our skills and background?
I love that question. I asked job seekers, what sets you apart from all
Mhm.
the other candidates? And a lot of them struggle. And I remind them if you're getting interviews, they already know you're qualified. They're not going to meet with you when they have hundreds or thousands of candidates to choose from if they just think you're qualified. They know everyone here is qualified. So I encourage people to write down a list of 10 or 20 things I say that make them fabulous. What's your unique value proposition? What sets you apart from the other people? And then sprinkle those throughout the interview. And you can literally have it written down on a piece of paper and check it off. So maybe it's you come from finance and highlight how that sets you apart. Maybe you speak multiple languages. Whatever it might be, I think it's key to remind them throughout the interview, here's what's different about me. I'm not just qualified for this role because everyone else who's interviewing is qualified. It's to keep reminding them, here's what's unique and different about me compared to everyone else who's also qualified.
I mean, the folks that you're working with, that you're coaching directly, they're a bit more experienced.
Mhm.
They're senior. They fall into that bucket in terms of having this great kind of wealth of examples to speak to. Are you noticing just generally, do hiring managers, do recruiters, are they putting a greater emphasis on more technical roles versus these so-called soft skills? They're often described as kind of a spectrum. Do you see the kind of market leaning on one end to the other?
Mm. I think it's in between. I think it's like this relevant experience, and you have to have the hard skills. You have to have done it before. They want someone who's really done it before. And if you're looking at a job posting and you haven't done this or something similar, they have so many candidates to choose from. But then on the flip side, they want those soft skills. They're going to be working with you 8, 9, 10 hours a day. They want to be able to communicate with you, collaborate with you, enjoy meetings, all of that. So I think it's both of those are really important in those interviews to be able to showcase your skills.
This might come across the wrong way, but I don't mean any ill will. But do you find out that a lot of tech, hardcore tech, lack the personal skills and the communication skills, and you need, as a coach, you have to coach them on, like, all right, here's what you have to do. You could be the greatest coder in the world, but if you can't get along with people and you can't communicate, it's not going to work. Is that a big
Oh,
part of your
definitely.
practice?
Oh, that comes up so
Yeah.
much. And I think sometimes people don't realize it. They haven't
Yeah.
gotten that, they haven't received that honest feedback.
Yeah.
Because when you're in a work environment, there's different stakes. You have to work with this person. With me, they're hiring me to give them that insight, that feedback, ask those reflective questions. And people just haven't done that. And my job is to make sure they go into that interview, they excel. Same with their resume. People are like, oh, your resume looks great. And I'm able to give them some deeper insights. So oftentimes it's a lot of little things too. I think of it like the Olympics. Really, you're competing against the best of the best. If you've made it to those interviews, maybe you're the top 5 out of 1,000 people who applied. So you're the best of the best. And now it's those teeny little tweaks that can make a difference. And they're often little tweaks no one's pointed out to them before.
So what kind of tweaks? So, like, what's the secret? Like, what's the secret sauce
Yeah.
there? Yeah.
Usually it's people not owning what's unique or different about them. They just kind of share some examples, or they're not backing it up. They're not sharing examples. They're like, oh, I'm a great team leader. Oh, I'm really compassionate or have empathy, but they don't give any examples or back it up. Other times using a lot of we. That's one of my pet peeves when working with people and they go into interview, they just say we. And it's really difficult to discern, like, were you just part of this team? And they're like, no, I led this entire initiative, but it's really unclear as me listening to them what they did. Um, the other is evidence. A lot of times they just go in and kind of speak really broadly, but there's no specifics that allow me to imagine them succeeding in that role. And then with tech folks, sometimes they just don't share any of their personality. I will hear them speak for a while and I didn't really learn anything about them. And I'm like, I don't really know about you at all. Like, you've shared some examples, but I don't know anything about you. And really, people are hiring other people. And we want to know more about who you are as a human.
Would that mean kind of almost telling a story about who you are, what you're about, why you want this job, why you want this company, and you want to keep it compact because you don't want to bore them. But is that something you suggest to people? Like, okay, you want to come in with this story so you stand out, and they'll choose you as opposed to someone else who's just like, oh, I just want to have Amazon on my resume.
Exactly. People aren't going to remember $1 billion of these sales or this number of users. People are going to remember those stories and say, ooh, that was the guy that did this. And really, those stories that are really memorable, unique, sticky, that then after they've had 10 interviews, met with 40 people over the week with all their different work meetings, they're going to then be like, ooh, that was the guy that this. You want to have those sticky, memorable stories that resonate.
I mean, I'm gonna do something dangerous. I'm gonna pull on this thread and keep pulling. Are there any other common mistakes that you see candidates making, especially in this super competitive job market we have here?
Yes, something I find, actually wrote an article for Blind about this, is when people share stories, a lot of people use the STAR method: situation, task, action, result, to answer behavioral questions. I like that method, but I recommend a 5th portion, tying it back. A lot of times, especially when people make career changes, if they pivot, as we said, from finance, for example, to tech, they don't tie it back. They say, here's this great story from Wells Fargo, and then you're applying to, let's say, PayPal. But they don't tie the story back. They just give an example. I think of it like a present, and they say, hey, here, Jack, is a cheese board. And you're like, it's July. Why are you giving me a cheese board? And they don't connect the dots. And I think of the tie like wrapping paper and a bow. You have to explain, here's why I'm giving you this gift, and connect the dots for them or wrap it. And that's really important. Every time you share a story, you want to say, here's why I'm giving you this story and how my experience from Wells Fargo relates to PayPal, for example, and really connect the dots. And you can even say, here's why I'm sharing this story with you and how it relates. Even though that was a bank, here's how it relates to digital payments. And with that story, even if it's only a sentence or two at the end, you're really helping them understand how your experience is relevant.
I love that advice because I don't know if I've seen this trend where folks almost seem like, oh, well, my experience should speak for itself. And, I'm sharing this example because, well, they asked me about it. They should know how it connects, but really explicitly in your face, laying it out for them. It's not too aggressive. It's not, you're not doing it without tact. It's literally what
Yeah.
they want to see, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and you can even tie it back to their question, like, oh, this is just one example of how I've done this or how I've done that. And you're just connecting it, putting that bow on it at the end. And I find that really helps set people apart, especially, I think for anyone I would do the tie, but especially for those people who are transitioning, making sure you end your star with that T and tying it back to just make it crystal clear for them.
Speaking of tying it back, when you said about like 5, 6, 7, 10 different interviews, do you suggest to people for each to have like your story, but then tailor it? If I'm speaking to HR, I'm going to go a little different. If I'm speaking to my direct manager that I'm going to work for, tailor it that way and so forth. Would you coach people to say, okay, have like your core story, but then tweak it depending on who you're speaking with, and not worry that you're saying the same thing to everybody?
Yeah, I think of the stories, I kind of think of it like a sandwich. The middle of the story can be the same. And then you can have the T at the end where you tailor it depending on who it is. And then at the beginning, you can also have some bread at the beginning. The T is kind of like the bottom piece of bread. And then you can have some bread at the beginning where you tailor it as well, depending on the recruiter. They're going to want to know something different. Like, yes, I have experience in product. Can I give a story and then tie it back at the end? This is one example of product. If you're speaking to an executive, it might be more high level. Yes, I've worked on a lot of products that have directly impacted revenue growth. Here's a story. That's one example, and that's your bread at the bottom. So the kind of middle, the meat or the eggplant or the cheese is going to stay the same. And then the bread on the top and bottom, you're going to change depending on their question and depending whether you're speaking to the executive or the recruiter or the hiring manager.
Now, I mean, is there such a thing as a so-called personality hire in a competitive market? We've all heard that buzzword. We've all seen the TikTok videos, right? Where it just seems like, wow, like, Kyle, what you're describing to me just seems so much like vibes. I thought in a hard competitive market, my experience working at XYZ or doing ABC project, that's going to stand me out. This seems unfair.
Oh, goodness. A lot of companies are working to reduce bias, and they're doing a lot of work to reduce bias where they'll take notes and share it with someone else or remove names. And humans are making hiring decisions. So there's going to be personality in there, there's going to be bias in there, there's going to be prejudice throughout. So part of this, companies are trying to reduce that bias throughout the hiring process. And part of it's going to be personality. It's going to be preference. It's going to be likability. All of that plays a part as well. It's going to be who you know. So having people vouch for you as well can make a difference. So it's not just skills or data or having the best example. It's also other factors as well that are beyond your control.
Can we talk about like who you know and make that recommendation? Because I think that's a really good way to get your foot in the door, to find somebody you know at the company and have them share their resume and have them recommend you. So if you have 200 resumes to look at and, Rick says, Kyle is great and Jack says Kyle is great, then like, all right, there's 200 resumes. Let's just put Kyle to the top because it makes it easier.
Yeah.
Is that a way to do it? And if so,
Oh,
like,
yes.
how can you kind of make that happen?
I love LinkedIn for that reason.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of easy searching to say like my first degree connections who work here or who used to work here.
Yeah.
Sometimes people only look at who currently works there. And if people left without burning bridges, people still know their former colleagues from a place. So saying, hey, can you introduce me to this person? And oftentimes, if someone doesn't even know someone that well, they'll still reach out to them. I haven't been for a formal employer in quite a few years, but I'll still connect people to my old employers and say, hey, here's someone who wants to learn more about this company. Will you chat with them? So I'm a huge fan of using LinkedIn or other platforms to reach out and or search and then reach out to people who work at a target company or who used to work there. Same with the family and friends, reaching out to them. That can be powerful to raise your resume and land that first round interview. You still have to do well in the interview, but it can help you get that first interview and get past those other 200 applicants who are just kind of going to be getting a 5 or 10 second screen by the recruiter rather than getting a real good read because they were referred. And I'm a fan, like you said, Jack, having multiple people refer you as well. Most people think you only need one person. But if I was hiring and 8 different people emailed me saying, hey, you need to interview this person, I think that can be really a powerful testament to how powerful of a candidate you are.
Right, because it makes it easier because you're not sure, who do I go to? Who's the best person? But if you keep the same person keeps coming up, you can say, you know what? Let's go with that person, right?
Yeah,
It's almost the path of least resistance. Like, all right, everyone seems to like
yeah.
this person. Let's funnel this person up to the top.
Yeah, I think of it like Yelp or a Google review or something like, okay, there's 1 or 2 five
Mhm.
stars, but there's 10 of them. You really want to go to that place. It must be good, or if there's a line out the door. So I would leverage that as well and have multiple people refer you if possible.
I also find that the more senior you get, the expectation is almost there that, well, you should have had greater scope or more project or more visibility. It's almost a red flag if you don't come in with a strong recommendation or a network, or you can't demonstrate that. Because part of that referral is being able to show, hey, I do have these built-in relationships across the company, in my industry, in my specialty,
Mhm.
already in hand.
Yes, I totally agree. I think too, it's part of the role as well, depending on that role. I think a role like yours, people want those relationships. And I think too, if you're not used to doing that collaboration, or if you're just existing in a silo, that can also be a red flag and backfire. If they're like, you don't know anyone, why? Were you just working on your own projects and not communicating or collaborating with anyone else can be problematic. So I think it isn't just do you interview well and have a good resume, but all of this is really an interview. You showing that you know how to network and build relationships, that you know how to reach out, that you know how to follow up. All of this is really the interview as well.
Well, just to take a sidestep a little bit, I see on Blind all the time where it's like, oh, do I take this job with Apple or do I take this job with Amazon or I'm making this up, level 7 or this? Like, how do you coach people to say to take this company versus another, company where where presuming that the person has the background experience
Yeah.
to decide like which is better, which is not? Is it money oriented? Is it prestige? Is it like, what are some of the things that people come to you for and say, hey, I want to go to this company because I feel if I'm this company, my family, friends are going to think I'm so cool and
Hmm.
smart. Or if I go to this other company, they're going to think I'm an idiot. And like, why is he going to this company? So can
Hmm.
you give some color? And this is not just tech. This is kind of
Yeah. Oh,
also non-tech
everything.
too. Like, what would you
Yeah.
suggest to people who come to you, not sure, like, and they
Yeah.
want to go to these different types of companies?
It's the same way I would approach like trying to buy a house or look
Mhm,
for a rental or like where you're going to go on vacation. I create a rubric with a lot of
mhm.
clients and say, what do you need in your next job? What do you want or don't want? And then what's a deal breaker? And ideally, this I do this with clients in the very first session before you start looking for jobs and make that list and say like, okay, I need this certain salary or I need it to be in tech or I want to manage people, and getting really clear what category things are in. I say we can't have them in more than one. You either need to say, I have to manage people or I want to. Like, let's put it in a certain category. So then when you get to this stage where you have multiple offers, you really don't have to think that much. You just go through and see which one lines up the most. And some clients are really technical, so they'll literally create a spreadsheet and they'll have weights and they're like, this job's 704 points and this job's 802 points. Other clients, they're like me, they're less technical and it's more just like check marks, which one lines up more. But I find that to be helpful before you get in the emotions of having multiple job offers. You can really just think about what's important. And if you have a partner or family, you can go through and reflect and say, is it job title that's important? Is it salary? Is it commute? Okay, maybe I need to be within 30 minutes of my house. I want to be within 15 minutes, and really reflect on all of that. And then that list might adapt as well as you're interviewing places. You may be like, this person's a micromanager. I can't have that. Let me add that to that list. And some people have maybe 2 items on their list. Other clients have had over 40 items on their list. They're really picky or particular and have certain things on their list that matter to them. But I find that to be helpful to have that rubric. So then when you get to that decision point, you don't get overwhelmed with your options.
I mean, I'm gonna take advantage of your coaching here. You know, if I'm starting from scratch and I'm trying to build that rubric, like you've tasked
Mm-hmm.
me with that, and I just have no idea. Maybe I'm miserable in my current
Mm-hmm.
job. Maybe I've been laid off for quite a
Mm-hmm.
few months, and I say to you, you know what? I'm not going to be picky, right? Like maybe I just want anything. How can you help me build that structure and build
Yeah.
that rubric for me to make my decisions?
I get that a lot, Rick. I love that. I would say, what if it's miserable in your job? Let's start adding that to your list. Like, let's say, okay, I'm miserable about my boss. Okay, what about your boss do you not like? Let's add that. Or what would you like in your boss? Or what would you like day to day? Let's add that. I love surveying people around us. A lot of my clients, I'm like, let's delegate your homework. Let's text 3 or 5 friends and ask them, what would make Rick happy? What would he like in his job? And have them do some of your homework. The same with companies, and this is an aside, but I'll give you an example. Like if you're like, I don't know what companies to look at, ask some friends, where should I work? I don't know what jobs to do, ask friends. So whenever you're stuck, that's my favorite place to kind of go, is to survey people around you. That's why I love Blind too. You can go on there and say, what should I do for a living? What companies should I work at? I would kind of delegate when you're stuck and ask other people those questions. But for this, if you kind of don't know what you want, I would just see what you don't like and maybe start adding that, or ask some people around you that know you a bit, kind of, if they have ideas of what should be on this rubric or this guide for your job search.
No, I really appreciate that advice because, you know, I've worked with a previous manager and they've given me this framework in terms of folks have like superhero skills, right? Things that are really great, but then each of these skills, they actually have a quote unquote shadow, right? And
Mm,
so if you are a perfectionist, that quote unquote shadow might be that it takes a while for you to get things done, right?
mhm,
Or, you know, you're really into micromanaging others, right? These kind of things that may be natural extensions of certain things or certain skills.
mhm.
And so if you maybe don't have an idea in terms of what matters most, the opposite might be actually more revealing.
Yeah, it can be powerful. When I do this, some clients have a really long list in one category and not the other. It's interesting. Like, here's everything I need. There's no deal breakers, or vice versa. So that's why I have the different categories, since some people think differently. And then looking at the flip can be really helpful. Why do we have so many in this category and not the other, or vice versa? Or why are you open to so many jobs? Or why are you open to none? And can we kind of go in between the two? Can we add some more jobs if you're open to nothing? Or can we remove some jobs if you're open to literally anything in the world, and kind of find a middle ground here?
Well, on a macro level, what are you seeing in the marketplace? You know, what's hot, what's growing, and what's not. So for people who either want to move into tech, let's say from finance into tech, or people who are already in tech, what would you suggest? Like it's growing, it's building, or company or sectors that not so good, maybe avoid?
I would say higher level thinking is how I would describe it. So stuff that cannot be automated. So the management of people or processes or programs, things that AI can't do. Um, the way I would word it is like, could my job be done by a bot or could my job be done by AI? And those things that can't be outsourced to an AI is my way of thinking about it. Like an HR business partner, for example, in tech can't just be outsourced. There's this human element to it, or program management. There's AI elements to the programs that are happening or the projects, but someone has to orchestrate all these people and programs. So I like thinking like higher level thinking is really where there's going to be a lot of AI, not AI happening, and a lot of jobs managing people, programs, projects, this higher level thinking around advising and strategy and operations. I would give that kind of the umbrella if I had to describe where a lot of jobs are going to be open.
This is so interesting and a little scary too. So, like Rick, I'll be curious about your side. Are you so? From what Kyle is saying, it feels. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it feels like the way things are going, that AI is really going to take over a lot of different jobs or degrade jobs. So maybe the human factor is going to be more important. Um, so is this a kind of a game changer now? Like, where maybe the software engineers, software developers might not be as much in demand, but now you're going to have that human touch. Are we going through a big change possibly?
I wonder if it's maybe more of a function of the number of roles, right?
Mhm.
So there's still always a place for software engineers, even on the more junior level, they're just going to be fewer and far between. Or they're, to Kyle's point, they're going to be working on more strategy
Mm.
or project based that are more, higher level. I wonder if some companies right now maybe they're just a bit AI curious and they're not yet there in terms of the
Yeah.
implementation, right? Because they don't know how this new technology can really fit into their existing processes or even their entire product or service. And so I wonder if we're still, in terms of time, we're still a little bit far way out that we don't need to worry about,
Mhm.
the hundreds of thousands of jobs being
Mhm.
lost this year. Maybe it's just the process or the shift is kind of what we're all grappling with right now.
I think it's that. I think it's going to change the jobs because humans have to create the AI, optimize the AI, manage the AI. So I think it might be engineers managing the AI and then people managing those engineers and the processes and the systems. So I think it's going to be a shift in the number of jobs or even what those jobs look like as well. And then there's going to be jobs around like the ethics of AI and the management of AI. There's going to be like changes in those jobs as well. The policy of AI, trust and safety. I see a lot of clients going into kind of jobs, not just doing the AI, but like around AI as well.
I mean, outside of this great advice about AI, the industry, AI, the technology in terms of how it's functioning with our jobs, and then three, how we're working around AI, are there any other kind of industries or spaces or functions that you seem might be, really great to make that shift to?
I see tech adjacent or tech enabled. I think oftentimes people think tech, 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 and I think everything
Right.
around tech as well. So we think like Uber, yes, it's a tech company-ish, but then it's kind of tech enabled. We have food delivery. There's all these other ones that are impacted by tech, or if we think like health or health tech. Everywhere, almost everywhere has tech. I have a cousin who's in agriculture, but they use a lot of tech to decide how they plant. And I don't know agriculture that well, but how they plant and do the soil things.
Mm.
So tech is going into nearly every industry, if it's not in every industry already. So tech is kind of going everywhere. So that can be really powerful as well to look beyond just these typical companies that are purely tech. If you want to get into tech and can be one of those great lily pads, Or you might go to a lily pad and say, actually, I like it here. I don't need to go to a company that's 100% tech as well.
'Cause I wonder if it's also, demonstrating or trying to build that skill set in your current role. Like perhaps you might not need to make that shift to gain those skills or get that firsthand experience, but maybe there's some value in terms of, you know, taking advantage to our earlier conversation, the existing networks and existing kind of processes that can benefit us today and perhaps sooner rather than having to make an extreme switch or going through the long process of an interview and reaching out to folks to kind of get you started there.
I'm a huge fan of that. People, when they come to me and say, "Oh, I want to work at this company because I want this to be on my resume," I say, "What if we take your job now and rewrite how you want your resume to look like without Amazon on it, but your current job, you want tech experience or you want project management or people management. Let's rewrite your resume how you want it to look in your current job for, let's say, 2025. Now let's make that happen here. Or what are the steps you could start taking?" They say, "Oh, I actually don't need to go get a new job for this. Maybe I can join an ERG, an employee resource group, or maybe I could lead this committee, or maybe I could ask to lead this project." So that can be really powerful too, to actually take on those additional responsibilities in your current job instead of just having to leave somewhere else, and actually treating your current job like a new job and creating a 30, 60, 90-day plan, taking on new initiatives can be a powerful way to up-level yourself. And then if you do decide to leave, you have all those additional skills and accomplishments on your resume as well.
Oh boy. Kyle, thank you so much for your wisdom and your expertise. For folks that want to get in touch with you, want to benefit from your, tech industry expertise and knowledge and your career advice, how can they get in touch and get started working with you?
Yes, my website, caffeinatedkyle.com. Feel free to head over there and check me out. Or I'm on LinkedIn a lot, Kyle Elliott, with 2 L's and 2 T's.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle.
Thanks, Kyle. That was great. Thanks
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.